that Mr. Green of Tennessee, Mr. McCall, Mr. Biggs, Mr. Higgins of Louisiana, Mr. Klein, Mr. Guest, Mr. Garbarino, Ms. Green of Georgia, Mr. Pfluger, Ms. Hageman, and Ms. Lee of Florida are appointed managers to conduct the impeachment trial against Alejandro Nicholas Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, that a message be sent to the Senate to inform the Senate of these appointments, and that the managers so appointed may, in connection with the preparation and the conduct of the trial, exhibit the articles of impeachment to the Senate and take all necessary actions, which may include the following. 1. Employing legal, clerical, and other necessary assistance, and incurring such other expenses as may be necessary to be paid from amounts available to the Committee on Homeland Security under applicable expense resolutions or for the applicable amounts of the House of Representatives. 2. Sending for persons and papers and filing with the Secretary of the Senate on the part of the House of Representatives any pleadings in conjunction with or subsequent to the exhibition of the articles of impeachment that the managers consider necessary. With the permission of the Senate, I will now read the articles of impeachment. House Resolution 863. Resolved that Alejandro Nicholas Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States of America, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following articles of impeachment be exhibited to the United States Senate. Articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States of America in the name of itself and the people of the United States of America against Alejandro N. Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States of America, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1. Willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives, quote, shall have the sole power of impeachment, end quote, and that civil officers of the United States, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, quote, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, end quote. In his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, in violation of his oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, has willfully and systemically refused to comply with the federal immigration laws in that. Throughout his tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has repeatedly violated laws enacted by Congress regarding immigration and border security. In large part because of his unlawful conduct, millions of aliens have illegally entered the United States on an annual basis, with many unlawfully remaining in the United States. His refusal to obey the law is not only an offense against the separation of powers in the Constitution of the United States, it also threatens our national security and has had a dire impact on communities across the country. Despite clear evidence that his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law has significantly contributed to unprecedented levels of illegal immigrants entrance, the increased control of the southwest border by drug cartels, and the imposition of enormous costs on states and localities affected by the influx of aliens, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has continued in his refusal to comply with the law and thereby acted to the grave detriment of the interests of the United States. Alejandro N. Mayorkas engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. 1. Alejandro N. Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B2A of the Immigration and Nationality Act, requiring that all applicants for admission who are, quote, not clearly and beyond a doubt entitled to be admitted shall be detained for a removal proceeding, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro N. Mayorkas implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens were unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearance before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 2. Alejandro N. Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B1B2 of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined to have a credible fear of persecution, quote, shall be detained for further consideration of the application for asylum, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro and Mayorkas implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens were unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearances before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 3. Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention set forth in Section 235B1B3(4) of such act, requiring that an alien who is placed into expedited removal proceedings and determined not to have a credible fear of persecution, quote, shall be detained until removed, end quote. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro and Mayorkas has implemented a catch and release scheme whereby such aliens are unlawfully released, even without effective mechanisms to ensure appearance before the immigration courts for removal proceedings or to ensure removal in the case of aliens ordered removed. 4. Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 236C of such act, requiring that a criminal alien who is inadmissible or deportable on certain criminal and terrorism-related grounds, quote, shall be taken into custody, end quote, when the alien is released from law enforcement custody. Instead of complying with this requirement, Alejandro and Mayorkas issued, quote, guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, end quote, which instructs Department of Homeland Security, hereinafter referred to as DHS, officials that the, quote, fact an individual is a removable non-citizen should not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, end quote.
He should be impeached.
DHS, quote, personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction alone, end quote. Even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory arrest and detention pursuant to Section 236C of such act, to take them into custody. In Texas versus the United States, 40F 4th 205, 2022, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded that these guidelines had, quote, every indication of being a general policy that is so extreme as to amount to an abdication of statutory responsibility, end quote.
Absolutely.
And that is, quote, replacement of Congress's statutory mandates with concerns of equity and race is extra-legal and plainly outside the bounds of the power conferred by the INA, end quote. Number 5, Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 241A2 of such act, requiring that an alien ordered removed, quote, shall be detained, quote, during, quote, the removal period, end quote. Instead of complying with this mandate, Alejandro and Mayorkas issued, quote, guidelines for the enforcement of civil immigration laws, end quote, which instructs DHS officials that the, quote, fact an individual is removable non-citizen should not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them, end quote, and that DHS, quote, personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction alone, end quote, even with respect to aliens subject to mandatory detention and removal pursuant to Section 241A of such act. 6, Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully exceeded his parole authority set forth in Section 212D5A of such act that permits parole to be granted, quote, only on a case-by-case basis, end quote, temporarily and, quote, for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit, end quote. In that, A, Alejandro and Mayorkas paroled aliens en masse in order to release them from mandatory detention, despite the fact that, as the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit concluded in Texas versus Biden, 20F 4th 928, 2021, quote, paroling every alien DHS cannot detain is the opposite of the case-by-case basis determinations required by law, end quote. And, quote, DHS's pretended power to parole aliens while ignoring the limitations Congress imposed on the parole power is not non-enforcement. It's misenforcement, suspension of the INA, or both. B, Alejandro N. Mayorkas created, reopened, or expanded a series of categorical parole programs never authorized by Congress for foreign nationals outside the United States, including for certain Central American minors, Ukrainians, Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Colombians, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, and Hondurans, which enabled hundreds of thousands of inadmissible aliens to enter the United States in violation to the laws enacted by Congress. Alejandro N. Mayorkas willfully exceeded his release authority set forth in Section 236A of such act that permits, in certain circumstances, the release of aliens arrested on an administrative warrant, and that Alejandro N. Mayorkas released aliens arrested without a warrant despite their being subject to a separate applicable mandatory detention requirement set forth in Section 235B2 of such act. Alejandro N. Mayorkas released such aliens.
All right, so we're listening to the House Impeachment Manager, Mark Green there, the Republican from Tennessee. This just moments after the impeachment managers for the House physically walked the House-passed articles over to the Senate side to deliver them to the majority leader there. Chad Pergram is with us. Chad, talk us through what's happening now and what we are about to see happen next.
Well, this is where the House impeachment managers, basically the prosecutors, as I stated earlier, and Mark Green as the lead impeachment manager, get to make their case. If this trial actually goes on for a while, which we're not anticipating at this stage, we would probably hear from each of these managers presenting a section of a case that they were presenting to the Senate. This might, in fact, be the only time that we hear from Mark Green or any of the impeachment managers if the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has his way potentially tomorrow, sometime after 1 o'clock, and prospectively maybe moves to dismiss or send this to a committee or something along those lines. You know, Chuck Schumer, the Majority Leader, he has kept his cards very close to his vest here. He has not indicated exactly what he would do, only to say that he wants this wrapped up quickly and wants to get the best way to get this done. The other thing I should note is that it's just not up to Chuck Schumer. They have to vote. As I always say, it's about the math. They have to have 51 votes to move to dismiss this. That's not out of the ordinary to have some people who are absent. This is why Chuck Schumer indicated that he wanted all senators in place today. And if they move to dismiss tomorrow, that's it. Game over. They have ended this impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas. Patty Murray, the president pro tem, she is presiding. She is the most senior member of the majority party. She's presiding over this case. And Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, he wants to try to extend this. He might try to offer a motion, but I should note that Chuck Schumer, because he's the majority leader, he gets recognized first on the Senate floor. So he might be able to maneuver around Mike Lee and some of these Republicans who want to extend this trial and finish this rather quickly tomorrow. That would be it once they swear in the senators as jurors at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Those are the only things that have to happen. So when they wrap up presenting today, that might be the only time we hear from these impeachment managers, guys.
You mentioned, Chad, I'm just checking here just to kind of clarify. You mentioned that Chuck Schumer has the ability maybe to send this thing to committee. If that happens, does this become some kind of protracted effort?
It would protract it, but it would also free up the Senate floor. Mike Lee has been throwing up some procedural roadblocks to do some of the most basic quotidian things in the Senate over the past couple of days, where they've had to vote to go out of executive session on a nominee, to go into legislative session, to decide what time to recess. These are things that are done very quickly, and that's something they can wrap up pretty quickly if they get an agreement. They've done that before. They did this with Alcee Hastings, the former congressman and former federal judge in 1989. He was referred to a committee, guys.
All right, so Chad, I know you're going to stay right there with us as we cover this news live from the Senate floor. Mark Green continues to speak there. We're going to keep monitoring this for the next movement there. And by the way, we're told that several Republicans, including Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, will be holding a press conference following the article delivery. So we'll be watching for that and news out of the courtroom with former President Donald Trump just a few moments ago, with news on something the judge just said. We'll have that for you right after this quick break.
This trial should never be held, and Mayorkas should be impeached.
Our clients love these. You've got to read. And 49 so far in fiscal year 24. Additionally, in United States versus Texas, 599 U.S. 670.
Now on C-SPAN 2.
The United States Supreme Court heard a case involving Alejandro N. Mayorkas' refusal to comply with certain federal immigration laws that are at issue in this impeachment. The Supreme Court held that states have no standing to seek judicial relief, to compel Alejandro and Mayorkas to comply with certain legal requirements contained in the Immigration and Nationality Act. However, the Supreme Court held that, quote, even though the federal courts lack Article 3 jurisdiction over this suit, other forums remain open for examining the executive branch's enforcement policies. For example, Congress possesses an array of tools to analyze and influence these policies, and those are political checks for the political process, end quote. One such critical tool for Congress to influence the executive branch to comply with the immigration laws of the United States is impeachment. The dissenting justice noted, and I quote, "The court holds Texas' lack of standing to challenge a federal policy that inflicts substantial harm on the state and its residents by releasing illegal aliens with criminal convictions for serious crimes. In order to reach this conclusion, the court holds that the only limit on the power of a president to disobey a law like the important provisions at issue in Congress's power to employ the weapons of interbranch warfare," end quote. As the dissenting justice explained, quote, "Congress may wield what the Solicitor General described as political tools, which presumably means such things as impeachment and removal," end quote. Indeed, during oral argument, the justice who authored the majority opinion stated to the Solicitor General, and I quote, "I think your position is, instead of judicial review, Congress has to resort to shutting down the government or impeachment, or dramatic steps," end quote. Here, in light of the inability of an injured party to seek judicial relief to remedy the refusal of Alejandro and Mayorkas to comply with federal immigration laws, impeachment is Congress's only viable option. In all of this, Alejandro and Mayorkas willfully and systemically refused to comply with the immigration laws, failed to control the border to the detriment of national security, compromised public safety, and violated the rule of law and separation of powers in the Constitution to the manifest injury of the people of the United States.
Absolutely, he did it.
Therefore, Alejandro and Mayorkas, by such
Shamefully,
conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national and border security, the safety of the United States people, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with his duties and the rule of law. Alejandro and Mayorkas thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, and profit under the United States.
Amen. And Joe Biden deserves to be voted out of office
Breach of public trust.
in 2024.
The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives, quote, "shall have the sole power of impeachment," end quote, and that civil officers of the United States, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, quote, "shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors," end quote. In his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, in violation of his oath to well and faithfully discharge the duties of his office, has breached the public trust in that Alejandro N. Mayorkas has knowingly made false statements and knowingly obstructed lawful oversight of the Department of Homeland Security, hereinafter referred to as DHS, principally to obfuscate the results of his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. Alejandro N. Mayorkas engaged in this scheme of course of conduct through the following means. 1. Alejandro N. Mayorkas knowingly made false statements to Congress that the border is, quote, "secure," end quote, that the border is, quote, "no less secure than it was previously," end quote, that the border is, quote, "closed," end quote, and that DHS has, quote, "operational control of the border," end quote, as that term is defined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006. 2. Alejandro N. Mayorkas knowingly made false statements to Congress regarding the scope and adequacy of vetting of the thousands of Afghans who were airlifted to the United States and then granted parole following the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan after President Biden's precipitous withdrawal of the United States forces. 3. Alejandro and Mayorkas knowingly made false statements that apprehended aliens with no legal basis to remain in the United States were being quickly removed. 4. Alejandro and Mayorkas knowingly made false statements supporting the false narrative that U.S. Border Patrol agents maliciously whipped illegal aliens. 5. Alejandro and Mayorkas failed to comply with multiple subpoenas issued by congressional committees. 6. Alejandro and Mayorkas delayed or denied access of DHS Office of Inspector General, hereinafter referred to as OIG, to DHS records and information, hampering OIG's ability to effectively perform its vital investigations, audits, inspections, and other reviews of agency programs and operations to satisfy the OIG's obligations under Section 402B of Title V, United States Code, in part, to Congress. Additionally, in his conduct while Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro N. Mayorkas has breached the public trust by his willful refusal to fulfill his statutory duty to control, quote, duty to control and guard the boundaries and borders of the United States against the illegal entry of aliens, end quote, as set forth in Section 103A5 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Alejandro N. Mayorkas inherited what his first chief of the U.S. Border Patrol called, quote, arguably the most effective border security in our nation's history, end quote. Alejandro N. Mayorkas, however, proceeded to abandon effective border security initiatives without engaging in adequate alternative efforts that would enable DHS to maintain control of the border and guard against illegal entry. And despite clear evidence of the devastating consequences of his actions, he failed to take action to fulfill his statutory duty to control the border.
Absolutely.
According to his first chief of the U.S.
Shameful.
Border Patrol, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, quote, summarily rejected, end quote, the, quote, multiple options to reduce the illegal entries through proven programs and consequences, end quote, provided by civil service staff at DHS. Despite clear evidence of the devastating consequences of his actions, he failed to take action to fulfill his statutory duty to control the border, and that, among other things, Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated the Migrant Protection Protocols, hereinafter referred to as MPP. In Texas versus Biden 20F 4th 928 2021, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit explained that, quote, the district court pointed to evidence that the termination of MPP has contributed to the current border surge, citing DHS's own previous determinations that MPP had curbed the rate of illegal entries, end quote. The district court had also, quote, pointed out that the number of enforcement encounters, that is, instances where immigration officials encounter immigrants attempting to cross the southern border without documentation, had skyrocketed since MPP's termination, end quote. 2. Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated contracts for border wall construction. 3. Alejandro N. Mayorkas terminated asylum cooperative agreements that would have equitably shared the burden of complying with international asylum accords. In all of this, Alejandro N. Mayorkas breached the public trust by knowingly making false statements to Congress and the American people, and avoiding lawful oversight in order to obscure the devastating consequences of his willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law and carry out his statutory duties. He has also breached the public trust by willfully refusing to carry out his statutory duty to control the border and guard against illegal entry, notwithstanding the calamitous consequences of his abdication of that duty. Wherefore, Alejandro N. Mayorkas, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national and border security, the safety of the American people, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with his duties and the rule of law. Alejandro N. Mayorkas thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, and profit under the United States.
Absolutely.
Mr. President, that completes the exhibition of the articles of impeachment against Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. The managers request the Senate take order for the trial, and the managers now request leave to withdraw.
That would be Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Green. The Senate will duly notify the House of Representatives when it is ready to proceed. You may proceed to depart.
And I praise them for having the courage to do what exactly they're doing. And the American people should do the same thing to President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who have been a disaster for our country. On November 2024, the voters of the United States of America should cast him out of office
all senators under impeachment
and elect
rules, senators
President,
will be sworn in as
former
jurors
President Donald
tomorrow
Trump.
at 1 p.m., and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
And Chuck Schumer should be admonished for not supporting Israel. While they're being bombed and bombarded by Iran, who President Biden has helped to finance with China's influence and Russia's influence over his corrupt administration with his son and his family, shamefully.
All you gotta do is take two. I'll put the other. Put them on the side, because we need 8 for the reset.
I hope they're going to have a little news conference here. The R Travels with Dr. John Stephenson. We'll film it for you so that you can see this whole thing in its entirety as best as possible.
The Senate has now received the articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What happens next? The Senate tomorrow will convene at 1 p.m. to swear in the jurors. That is the official beginning of trial proceedings. Whether the upper chamber conducts a full trial to hear the evidence against the secretary remains unclear. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is looking to move quickly on the charges, while Republicans say any motion to dismiss the impeachment articles would be unprecedented. You can watch all of our coverage of the impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary on our website, cspan.org, and watch our live coverage tomorrow here on C-SPAN 2 or on C-SPAN Now, our free video mobile app.
Brought to you by Travels with Dr. John Stephenson, former Superintendent of Education, Commonwealth of Kentucky, last elected one 1992. On YouTube and on Facebook under John Stephenson and John A. Stephenson, and under Travels with Dr. John Stephenson on YouTube, www.begottenson.com and www.godsbiz.com. You can reach me by phone 859-750-0000. Dr. John Stephenson.
Administration's watch.
Senator Mitch McConnell.
Are well known. Since January of 2021, CBP has recorded more than 7.5 million illegal crossings at our southern border, while observers estimate over 1.5 million known gotaways. And last December saw the highest daily and monthly numbers ever recorded. In the 2 months since the House impeached Secretary Mayorkas, the border crisis has only continued, with excruciating consequences for innocent Americans.
Right.
On February 22nd, an illegal alien was arrested in Virginia for sexually assaulting a minor. The very next day, another illegal alien from Venezuela was arrested for the murder of Laken Riley, a young college student in Georgia. And the same month, yet another was charged with first and second degree murder for the shooting of a 2-year-old in Maryland. And for the Americans living right near the border, things are not improving. In February, one man working in Arizona recounted watching cartel guys lead over 170 people from around the world through one such opening in a matter of hours. The House managers will make the case for Secretary Mayorkas' role in neglecting and exacerbating that crisis. And as befits such a solemn and rare responsibility as convening a court of impeachment, I intend to give these charges my full and undivided attention. Of course, that would require that senators actually get the opportunity to hold a trial. And this is exactly what history and precedent dictate. Never before has the Senate agreed to a motion to table articles of impeachment, not for an officer of either party, not once. Instead, every single time that we've been called upon to render judgment, we've done so. We've convened a trial, or in accordance with Rule 11 of the impeachment rules agreed to in 1935, we've appointed a trial committee to dig into the facts and make a recommendation. It would be beneath the Senate's dignity to shrug off our clear responsibility and fail to give the charges we'll hear today the thorough consideration they deserve.
Absolutely.
I'll strenuously oppose any effort to table the articles of impeachment and avoid looking the Biden administration's border crisis squarely in the face. Now, on an entirely different matter, 2 months ago, the Senate passed a national security supplement.
Objection.
In light of the unprecedented attacks by Iranian forces on Israel over the weekend, and on the 64th day since the Senate passed a bipartisan national security supplemental bill, I come to the floor to once again call on the House to pass critical funding for Ukraine, for Israel, for the Indo-Pacific, and importantly, for our own national security needs here at home. Over the past 6 months, I've worked with senators from both sides of the aisle to urge passage of supplemental funding to support
Overruled
our national
Senator
security.
McConnell at
And I am
C-SPAN
beyond
2.
disappointed that Speaker
brought
Johnson and House Republicans have delayed
Senator
much needed
Jeannie
critical aid,
Sheehan on,
especially
Democrat,
given the Senate bill that passed here with
and
70
the U.S. Senate.
bipartisan votes. I believe, and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle believe, that
From New
that
Hampshire.
passed the House if only the Speaker would bring the bill to the floor. Now, we hear this week that House Republicans may be nearing a vote on this aid. And while I'm encouraged by that, it is way past time for us to help the courageous Ukrainians who are fighting literally for the life.
You got no one to blame for that except the Democrats, my dear lady.
The Foreign Relations Committee.
Of what President Trump was tweeting about in this, saying that it's outrageous that Cohen and Daniels can do countless TV interviews, post on social, and make money on bogus documentaries, he writes. And this is Avenatti. This is what he retweeted. It's pretty funny, don't you think, that the president's praising Michael Avenatti, who was Stormy Daniels' attorney, and then went to jail after that? I mean, what a world, Alina.
It is quite a world, but I'll tell you, people are coming out of the woodworks. I think it's very telling, to be honest, Martha. People are sick and tired of seeing it.
The injustice system in our country is injustice, not justice. It's all political.
I think that's
unfortunately.
What people are doing at the moment. They're seeing it, they're flipping, they're taking independence
charges
and
against
into the Republican Party
former
because
President
they're sick
Trump
and tired of
are
seeing
ridiculous.
this injustice. And the judge admonishing
but look how they're
the
being
defendant, I've seen it
used
time
to
and time again.
try to stop him
I've been
from running.
admonished like that.
Anything
It's
they
by
can
design.
do.
It's to make you appear to
Stop
be
him from
inept.
speaking.
It's to make you appear
Shamefully.
to be stupid in front of a jury, and don't think that it's not intentional. All the trolls, all the journalists, they'll put that out there. And
I mean,
make
a lot of
you
people
don't know
would
what you're
interpret
doing.
that on both sides of people trying to, impact the jury pool and get their message out there before these jury members are chosen, which is obviously something that's a bit of a concern. But I want to go back to my question before I let you go. Do you think that this threat of 30 days in jail will change the social media actions of the former president in any way, or will he keep doing this?
I don't think so. I think that he is respectful, but there has to be boundaries, and we should appeal it. It's currently on appeal. So there's also a due process element to this. We have the items on appeal in this case that have not yet been heard.
Is he concerned about the possibility of being sent to jail as a ramification of these? He's not concerned about being sent to jail.
I think like anybody, he's concerned about going to jail, but if they put him in jail for his First Amendment right, he will be like Nelson Mandela. I mean, that would be just absurd, and frankly, they'll win him the election.
I just have a second, but there's two reports both days of him falling asleep in court. Any reaction to that? Is he tired? Has he just been running around a lot, or any thoughts on that?
If anything, he's probably brutally bored. I mean, it's painful. They make him sit there through jury selection. The first day was procedural, but no, I've heard that report. It's unlikely. I know him. I sat through trial after trial with him. That never happens. So President Trump is incredibly focused.
All right, Alina, thank you as always. Great to have you here. Alina Habba joining us this afternoon. And now the articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas now in the Senate. Let's listen to some of what the Republican members have to say about what's going to happen now.
Section 3, Clause 6 of the Constitution. The Senate shall have power to try all impeachments. That means all impeachments. The only 4 exceptions out of those 21 that I referenced are instances in which the case became moot or we lacked jurisdiction in the first instance. We don't lack jurisdiction in this instance. In fact, we haven't. Secretary Mayorkas is still in office. Unlike those 4, he was neither a member of the U.S. Senate and therefore not subject technically to the impeachment authority, but rather to expulsion, nor is he deceased, nor is he left office. So we retain subject matter jurisdiction over this. In that circumstance, we're expected and in fact required to conduct a trial. And what that means is we are sworn in. We're going to be sworn in tomorrow as senators, as performing the equivalent of the judge-jury function, where we're both finders of fact and also imbued with the authority to decide questions of law relative to the impeachment trial. And what all of that presupposes is that we will reach a finding of guilt or innocence. Guilty, not guilty. We shouldn't be sidestepping this. Now, previously, Chuck Schumer and the Democrats had talked a lot about wanting to just table this. Never in the history of the United States Senate have we addressed articles of impeachment with a motion to table. They're now talking about doing a motion to dismiss. That begs the question, on what basis are they going to move to dismiss? They haven't articulated their position. I suppose we'll hear about that more tomorrow. In any court of law that I know anything about, in order to simply dismiss an accusation, civil or criminal, you're going to have to make the case that the law doesn't allow what you to do what you're doing. It doesn't state a claim upon which relief can be granted, or here, a claim upon which a person can be impeached. I have yet to hear them make an argument to that effect. In the context of Rule 12b-6, motion to dismiss in civil litigation, you resolve all factual inferences and assume all facts alleged in favor of the plaintiff, the non-moving party. And if all those facts are true, then and only then do you get to assess that the complaint fails to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. I have yet to hear any articulation of their theory of why they're entitled to a motion to dismiss. And in fact, as we've just read, we've heard read and read along with the chairman of the House Impeachment Committee, Representative Mark Green from the state of Tennessee. If you take all those facts to be true, as I believe we must in this circumstance until we've had a chance to be finders of fact ourselves, there could be no doubt but that a case for impeachment can be made and has been made here, and that we must convene a trial to find these facts and reach an ultimate verdict as to guilt or innocence. We'll turn now to my friend and colleague from Texas, Senator Cruz.
We've just witnessed history being made. Only 22 times in our nation's history has the House of Representatives presented and delivered articles of impeachment to the Senate. Only twice in our nation's history has a cabinet member been impeached by the House. The stakes of this impeachment are not some technical violation of law, but rather an enormous and growing threat to the lives and safety of millions of Americans. Every year, under Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, we have seen millions of illegal aliens crossing into this country. Alejandro Mayorkas actively aided and abetting the criminal invasion of this country by criminal drug cartels and illegal aliens, and the consequences have been day after day after day migrants dying. 853 in the last year. The consequences have been day after day after day, little boys and little girls being brutalized by human traffickers. The consequences have been day after day after day, hundreds and even thousands of women being sexually assaulted by human traffickers. The consequences, which the House managers read out loud in the articles of impeachment, have been enriching the Mexican drug cartels to a level never before seen in history. In 2018, the drug cartels made roughly $500 million from human trafficking. In 2022, they made $13 billion. The single greatest friend the human traffickers have ever had has been Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas. Because under their open border policies, the drug cartels have seen their revenues rise 2,600%.
Amen. Shamefully.
Every week, we see another horrific crime committed by criminal illegal aliens that Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas continue to release. Laken Riley, beautiful 22-year-old woman in Georgia, a nursing student, just out for a jog. Like so many other women are out for a jog today, believing they live in a country where their safety will be protected, and it should have been. But Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas deliberately defied the law. They apprehended her killer when he came illegally into this country. He was in El Paso. Had Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas simply followed the law, they would put him on a plane and float him back to Venezuela, and Laken Riley would still be alive. But they didn't. They defied the law. They let him go. And he went to New York City, another sanctuary city, where he was apprehended again, this time for endangering the safety of a child. If New York City had simply followed the law, if they put him in jail, Laken Riley would still be alive. But again, New York City let him go, and this murderer came down to Georgia and beat Laken Riley to death with a brick. Jeremy Caceres, a 2-year-old little boy in Prince George's County, Maryland, just miles from where we are right now, murdered by an illegal alien Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas released. And just a couple of weeks ago, we saw another tragic case. We discovered that Alejandro Mayorkas and Joe Biden aren't simply allowing millions of illegal aliens in at our southern border. They're actually flying them in from their home countries. Over 320,000 last year, including one individual they flew from Haiti to Boston, Massachusetts. When he got here in Boston, Massachusetts, what did he do? Well, he was just arrested for violently raping a 15-year-old girl who's severely disabled. The consequences of this open border invasion are enormous, and interestingly enough, what you just saw is apparently terrifying. The men and women, the House managers who are here, and thank you for your service coming here, scare the living daylights out of Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. Tomorrow we're going to see Chuck Schumer throw out 200 years of history, ignore the Constitution. Why? Because he does not want these managers to present the evidence of the people dying because of their policies. Not just that have died yesterday and the day before, but the people that will die tomorrow. You want to know how terrified the Democrats are of hearing the evidence? Everyone recognizes the single most endangered Democrat senator on the ballot this year is John Tester from Montana. I don't know how many of the reporters were in the chamber for the reading of the articles, but John Tester was standing on the floor before the managers arrived. As soon as the managers arrived, Tester turned and ran, presumably into the cloakrooms. And if you look at the Democrat side, virtually every Democrat was there, but John Tester was nowhere to be found.
We will continue to monitor this as the senators give their case for the impeachment for Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And with that, I want to bring in the House Judiciary Committee Chairman and Oversight Committee Member, Ohio Republican Jim Jordan. Chairman, good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today.
You bet.
So we just heard Senator Cruz talking about what happened to Laken Riley, and that if the law had been upheld, he said, this never would have happened. And the reason that the impeachment was brought in the House was because of the belief that Mayorkas is not upholding the law, and that's a violation. But I just want to play this exchange between Mayorkas and Dan Bishop earlier about the Laken Riley case, and then I'd love to get your thoughts on it on the other side. Thank you. Here we go.
Which was it in Mr. Ibarra's case? Humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit that you paroled him into the United States?
I don't have the case details with me today.
Well, I'm not really asking for detail. I'm only asking for one simple fact.
My answer remains the same.
You don't know?
As I said, I do not have the details with respect to that individual's case.
I mean, given the loss of life of this young woman, how is it even possible that Secretary Mayorkas does not know off the top of his head whether Mr. Ibarra was kept in this country for humanitarian reasons or significant public health benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You would think you would know that, but remember, this is the same guy who in front of our committee 2 years ago, we asked him, how many on the terrorist watch list, what's the status of those individuals, where are they at, have they been detained or what? And he said, I'll have to get back with you. So this is the second article, breach of trust, failure to answer questions. Not only has he not followed the law, but he's breach of public trust and not being able to give us answers to questions like that should be obvious. But we've actually asked for all these individuals who've done harm to Americans, whether it's theft, whether it's attack, whether it's rape, whether it's murder. We want to know the case files on all of those. So what he just said to Congressman Bishop was, I'll have to go check the file. I don't have it in front of me. We've asked for all those files, and Secretary Mayorkas will not give them to the committee. So that is a huge problem, coupled with all the other things they've done wrong relative to our border.
So what do you say to those in the Senate, and some of them are Republicans, who say this isn't how we do this? We don't impeach a cabinet member. It's unprecedented, or hasn't happened for an extraordinarily long time. And he's simply carrying out the policy of the White House, who appointed him.
Yeah, fair enough, but it's also unprecedented what's happening on our border. And we know it started with day one, when this administration said, we're no longer going to remain in Mexico. We're going to stop building the wall. And when you get here, you will not be detained. You will be released.
So ignoring this problem has not impacted voters, at least according to the polls. Do you think the situation at the U.S. border with Mexico, with a large number of migrants seeking to enter the U.S., is leading to more crime? 57% say yes. It would be helpful if there was just, acknowledgement of the actual situation and some thoughts on how to stop it, how to assuage the threat that is presented, and obviously people are clear on it.
The country gets it, and they don't appreciate the Secretary of Homeland Security telling us everything is fine. So that is why it's at the top of every poll done. And frankly, I think one of the many reasons why President Trump's going to be our next president.
We will see. Congressman Jim Jordan, Chairman, thank you. Always good to see you. Thanks for being here today. So NPR suspends one of their veteran editors. He's I believe a Pulitzer Prize winner, after a scathing essay that he wrote that claimed from the inside
NPR should be ashamed of themselves.
Liberal bias and a lack of allowing diverse viewpoints inside this media organization. This is what he wrote after decades of working.
And the taxpayers should stop funding them completely.
So Jonathan Turley argues that NPR has a right to be slanted and biased. It does not have a right to public funding in presenting such coverage. When we come back. Frictionless on the story on one story after another about instances of supposed racism, transphobia.
He told the truth, and so they're mad at him.
Israel doing something bad.
All 85 of their employees, who are all Democrats, including himself, they're mad at him for telling the truth about NPR.
But first to Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel with the backstory here on Mr. Berliner. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Martha. The senior editor says the election of former President Trump was greeted at NPR with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and despair. Uri Berliner says the rise of advocacy at that network took off in the Trump era. He argues what began as tough, straightforward coverage of him veered toward efforts to damage or topple his presidency. Berliner wrote in the Free Press, quote, "It's true, NPR has always had a liberal bent, but during most of my tenure here, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk, activist, or scolding. In recent years, however, that has changed." NPR executive Edith Chapin said she strongly disagreed in a memo to staff obtained by Fox. Quote, "We're proud to stand behind the exceptional work that our desks and shows do to cover a wide range of challenging stories. We believe that inclusion among our staff with our sourcing and in our overall coverage is critical to telling the nuanced stories of this country and our world."
You're over the line liberal.
And he's suspended
extremely,
for 5 days.
and you should be shameful.
Mike, thank you.
Using taxpayer dollars like that.
And Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley. Jonathan, great to have you with us. There are a number of stories that Mr. Berliner cites in this. He talks about COVID and the way that they were told to frame that story, to stay far away from any suggestion that it might have come from the Wuhan COVID lab down the street.
That's a man that's a hero right there, telling the truth.
Surrounding President Trump. And he says, as part of that Senator Adam Schiff was pretty much their main source on this story, that they were in touch with him and getting feedback from
how you
him on a
doing?
very regular basis.
Oh, pretty good.
Everybody,
Hang on just a second, I'll shut this off.
Schiff at that point. Let's watch this March 22nd NPR interview. Watch.
We have seen ample evidence of collusion very much in the public eye. Whether that evidence amounts to proof beyond reasonable doubt of a criminal conspiracy, I've always said will be up to Bob Mueller. But nonetheless, the evidence of that.
This guy's a total liar here. I've watched him for years.
And the president in Russia needs to be exposed.
The evidence needs to be exposed, he said. Jonathan Turley, your thoughts on this?
This attorney is very honorable.
This falls into that category in the media of stories too good to check. You know, the NPR ran with a number of false stories, not just Russian collusion. Also on the Lafayette Park controversy, they ran with false statements or stories on that. They kept them up after they were disproven. And what this editor has done was to simply confirm what all of us knew, that that NPR has become unrelentingly partisan, and they've engaged in this type of advocacy journalism. But at the end of the day, Martha, it doesn't matter what the slant is or whether it's slanted. We need to have a discussion in this country about state-funded media. You know, this NPR is indistinguishable from media outlets like MSNBC or CNN, but they don't receive these subsidies. The question is why the United States, every taxpayer, should subsidize NPR. You know, the NPR audience is overwhelmingly wealthy, they're certainly better off than most Americans. They're overwhelmingly white, and they're overwhelmingly liberal. About 70% identify themselves as liberals, and yet they expect every taxpayer to support them. So the question is, as a country, is this really what we want to do? Do we want the government funding particular media platforms over others?
Yeah, we know there's been a lot of pushback from the new CEO.
And that's
NPR.
glad to bring you these programs today. Travels with Dr. John Stephenson on YouTube and Facebook. God bless you and have a great day. 859-750-0000 is my phone number if you have any questions. Have a great day now.